Damon's fingers closed around my arm and hauled me down the corridor toward the room where they weighed omegas like livestock. "Smile," he said. "You're worth more if you smile." 2 months ago I would have. 2 years ago I would have thanked him for the reminder. I had spent 5 years learning the exact temperature of his voice that meant comply and the exact temperature that meant run, and both of them lived in that single word now. I didn't smile. I let my face go still and blank, the way I used to hold ledgers steady when his hands shook too badly with rage to write the numbers himself. I had written every name in that ledger. Every contact. Every route his shipments took out of the Eastern District and every alpha who paid extra to skip the paperwork. He never once thought to wonder what I did with what I read. The auction room smelled worse than the fever. Copper and antiseptic and old sweat baked into the walls. Rows of buyers sat behind a glass partition like they were watching livestock judged at a fair. And beneath the industrial lighting I could see exactly how many of them were syndicate men I recognized from Damon's private correspondence. Faces I'd typed into invoices for years, thinking I was only ever going to be the woman who kept his house in order. My twins turned inside me restless as if they could feel how close the walls were getting. "Not tonight," I told them silently. "Not like this." Damon shoved me toward the raised platform where the bidding would start, and for one moment his grip loosened. Just enough, just barely, the kind of carelessness that comes from a man so certain of his ownership he forgets to hold on properly. I ran. I didn't think about it. My body simply decided before my mind caught up. Some animal thing older than fear driving my legs down the service corridor, past startled handlers, past a door someone had left unlocked because no one expected an Omega 5 months pregnant and burning with infection to move that fast. Behind me I heard Damon's voice crack across the room. Not panic, not yet, just fury, the outraged fury of a man who has misplaced something he owns. He'll be more careful when he finds me, I thought, and kept running. The night outside was colder than anything I remembered, snow catching in my hair, my bare feet screaming against ice-slicked stone. I didn't know this district. I didn't know which direction led away from him and which led back into his hands. I only knew that stopping meant the auction block, and the auction block meant losing my children to whoever paid the highest price for a matched set, and that thought alone kept me upright long after my body should have folded. The infection had been eating at me for days, some deep, low fire under my skin that no amount of stolen antibiotics had touched. I felt it flare now. A wave of heat and nausea that buckled my knees against a low stone wall. Blood, warm and wrong, slicked down the inside of my thigh. "Not yet," I begged whatever was listening. "Please. Not yet." I don't know how far I made it before the world tilted sideways and the snow rushed up to meet me. I remember the cold first, and then I didn't feel cold at all, which frightened me more than anything Damon had ever done because I understood, distantly floating somewhere just outside my own body, that this was what dying felt like. Quiet. Almost gentle. The last thing I registered was a sound like the world cracking open. A deep, rolling growl that didn't belong to Damon, that didn't belong to anyone I knew, vibrating up through the ground and into my bones like a second heartbeat. And then hands. Not Damon's hands. Larger, careful in a way I had no memory of careful ever being, lifting me like I weighed nothing at all. A voice above me, low and rough with something I would later learn was barely restrained fury on my behalf. "Who did this to you?" I tried to answer. I tried to tell this stranger to run, that whoever he was, whatever claim he was making just by touching me, Damon would come for both of us now. That I had seen what happened to people who stood between Damon and something he considered his. But the dark took me before I could get a single word out, and the last thing I felt, right before I went under completely, was my own children going suddenly terribly still.
Chapter 2. Found in the Snow. Matteo. I smelled the blood before I smelled her, copper cutting through pine and frost, wrong in a way that made every instinct I had stand up at once. I'd been tracking syndicate activity along the eastern border for 3 weeks, following whispers of a breeding operation running product through territory that belonged to me whether the syndicate respected that or not. I expected to find crates, ledgers, maybe a body already cold. I didn't expect a woman collapsed against a stone wall, 5 months pregnant by the look of her, snow melting pink beneath her hip, skin burning with fever hot enough that I felt it before I even touched her. I don't remember deciding to growl. It happened low in my chest, involuntary, the sound my body makes when something in front of me needs protecting and I haven't yet worked out from what. My hands found her carefully, old habit, old discipline, the kind you don't lose even when everything in you wants to move fast, and I lifted her like she weighed nothing because she did, because whoever had let her get this thin should never touch another living thing again. Who did this to you? I said, not really expecting an answer. She was already gone, eyes rolled back, lips moving around a word she didn't have the strength to finish. I carried her 3 miles through snow that should have slowed me and didn't. Whatever had her, infection, blood loss, both, was moving fast, and I have buried enough people to know the particular stillness that comes right before a body decides to stop fighting. Hers hadn't stopped yet. It was close. My physician met me at the gate already shouting for a bed to be prepared, because word travels ahead of me on my own land, and by the time I laid her down I understood exactly how bad it was. Sepsis. Twins, both still showing heartbeats on the scanner, though weaker than I liked. A tracking brand burned into the skin beneath her ribs, syndicate issue, recent enough that the edges hadn't fully healed. Someone had done that to her on purpose. Marked her like inventory. I stayed while they worked, which is not something I usually allow myself. I am not a man who watches, I am a man who acts, and standing at the edge of a room doing nothing while someone's life hung in the balance was its own particular kind of torment. But I couldn't make myself leave. Something about the way her hand had curled, even unconscious, around the curve of her own stomach, protecting what was left to protect, even with nothing left to protect it with, kept my feet planted at that door for 6 hours straight. She woke somewhere near dawn. I felt it before the physician did, some shift in the air of the room, and when I stepped back into her line of sight her eyes found mine and went instantly, violently afraid. Not confused. Not disoriented. Afraid, in the specific, trained way of someone who has learned that waking up near an alpha means something is about to be taken from her. I made myself small. I have never made myself small for anyone in my life, but I dropped my shoulders and lowered my eyes and kept 3 full strides between us, because whatever had put that fear in her had clearly taught it well, and I was not going to be one more lesson in the same subject. You're safe, I told her, quiet as I could make my voice. No one here will touch you without your say. Not me. Not anyone. She didn't believe me. I could see that plainly enough. The way she catalogued the exits, the way her hand never left her stomach, the way she watched my hands like they might turn into something else without warning. My children, she rasped instead, ignoring everything I'd said. Both of them. Weak but fighting. I watched something in her chest loosen at that, just barely, before the fear clamped back down. You're going to tell me your name eventually, I said. No rush. I've got nowhere better to be. Her mouth pressed into a thin line, considering whether that was a trap. Fara, she finally said, like the word cost her something. I nodded like I hadn't just felt my chest do something unfamiliar and complicated at the sound of it. Matteo, I offered back. You're on my land now, Fara. Nothing gets through my gates that I don't allow through. I meant it as comfort. I watched it land instead as a threat, her whole body going rigid, and understood with sudden, cold clarity that nothing gets through without my say was very likely the exact shape of a promise someone else had made her once, right before they became the thing she needed protecting from. I was still working out how to unsay it when the alarm at the northern perimeter went off, 3 short bursts, the signal my men use for hostile approach, armed. Fara heard it too. I watched all the color leave her face at once, watched her hand fist into the blanket over her stomach, watched her whisper a name under her breath that wasn't mine. He's found me already, she said. He's found me.
Chapter 3 Safe House. Fara. The alarm didn't stop. 3 bursts, then silence, then 3 bursts again, and every repetition felt like a hand closing tighter around my throat. Matteo didn't move like a man afraid. He moved like a man already 3 steps into a plan I couldn't see, crossing to the window, angling his body between me and the glass without seeming to think about it at all. Stay down, he said, and then to someone I hadn't noticed standing in the doorway. A woman, sharp-eyed, already armed. Sarah. Perimeter report. 2 vehicles, southern tree line. Not moving in yet. Could be scouts. Not Damon himself, then. Not yet. Scouts meant he was still deciding whether it was worth the cost of coming onto another alpha's land to reclaim what he considered his. I knew him well enough to guess which way that decision would go once his pride got involved. They'll report back, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He'll come himself next time. He won't send men to do the part he wants to enjoy. Matteo looked at me for a long moment, not with pity which I'd braced for, but with something colder and more useful. Calculation. Then we make sure next time isn't worth his while. The scouts left without crossing the tree line. Sarah's report came back 20 minutes later. Vehicles retreating east, no contact. I didn't feel relief so much as the absence of one specific fear replaced immediately by a longer, quieter one that had been living under my ribs since the auction floor. This isn't over, this will never be over, not as long as he's breathing and I'm still breathing too. Over the following days I learned the shape of Matteo's household the way I'd once learned the shape of Damon's. Except everything here ran backward from what I expected. Nobody flinched when he entered a room. His people spoke to him plainly, disagreed with him openly, and he listened like their opinions cost him nothing to hear. Sarah ran his security like it was hers to run. Martins, his physician, argued with him about my treatment plan without once lowering his eyes. I watched all of it the way you watch a language you don't yet trust yourself to speak. Matteo kept his distance exactly as he'd promised. He knocked before entering rooms I was in, even rooms that were technically his. He asked before touching anything near me. A blanket, a chair, once carefully my wrist to check a healing wound, and waited for the nod before he moved. Should have felt like nothing. It felt instead like being handed something I hadn't known I was starving for. The infection broke on the 4th day. I woke without the fever fog for the first time in over a week, clear-headed enough to actually look at the man who'd been sitting 3 feet from my door every night since I arrived. Close enough to hear if I called out, far enough not to crowd me. You don't have to keep doing that, I told him. Doing what? Guarding my door like I'm made of glass. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. I'm not guarding you like glass, Fara. I'm guarding you like something worth guarding. Different thing entirely. I didn't know what to do with that, so I didn't answer it. But that night, for the first time since I'd run, I slept without dreaming of Damon's hands. It was Martins who found the problem 3 days later, running a full scan to check on the twins. He went quiet in a way I'd already learned to be afraid of. The particular stillness of a man choosing his words before he says something no one wants to hear. There's a signal, he said finally. Faint. Intermittent. Coming from inside her. The brand, Matteo said, already understanding before I did. Martins nodded. It's not just a mark. It's transmitting. Low frequency, easy to miss unless you're looking, but if the syndicate built it to track their inventory, it's still doing exactly that. He looked at me and I watched him decide to just say it plainly. Every scout that came near your border already knew roughly where to look. It's only a matter of time before roughly becomes exactly. The room went very quiet. How long, I asked, before he stops sending scouts and comes himself? Martins didn't answer. He didn't need to. I already knew the shape of Damon's patience, and I knew it had a very short fuse once something of his was at stake, and nothing in his mind had ever been more his than me and what I was carrying. Matteo's jaw had gone tight, his eyes fixed on the readout still glowing faintly on the scanner. Then we take it out, he said, before he gets the chance to use it. Martins hesitated. It's not a simple procedure. It's embedded close to the abdominal wall. This close to full term with an active infection risk still lingering, the surgery itself carries real danger. To her. To the twins. I felt the old, familiar calculation settle over me, the one I'd learned during 5 years of choosing the least dangerous version of danger. And if we don't remove it? Martins met my eyes without flinching, which I'd come to understand by now meant he respected me enough not to soften it. Then he finds you, he said. It's not a question of if. It's a question of how many days you have left before he does.
Chapter 4. Cutting the Tether. Matteo. I have led men into fights I wasn't certain we'd walk away from. I have made decisions with lives balanced on the wrong side of the scale more times than I'd like to count. None of it prepared me for standing outside an operating room listening to Martin's list the ways this could go wrong for a woman I'd known less than 2 weeks. Say it again, I told him. All of it. Every risk. Matteo. All of it. He gave it to me straight, the way I'd trained him to years ago. Infection risk, bleeding risk, the danger of early labor triggered by the stress of the procedure itself, the narrow margin of error operating this close to the twins. I made myself listen to every word without flinching, because Fara deserved someone in that hallway who understood exactly what she was risking and didn't look away from it. She'd asked to be awake for it. Local anesthetic only, enough to numb the sight without putting her fully under, because, though she didn't say it outright, I understood the real reason. She had spent years unconscious to other people's decisions about her body. She wasn't going to hand hers over again, even to save her own life, without watching every second of it happen. I sat with her before they started, close enough that she could reach me if she wanted to, careful not to assume she would. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I know. I mean it. This isn't," she stopped, jaw tight. "You don't owe me company for this. I'm not here because I owe you anything." I kept my voice low, steady, the register I use for men who are about to walk into something dangerous and need to believe they'll walk back out. "I'm here because I want to be, and because you shouldn't have to do this looking at nothing but ceiling tiles and strangers." She looked at me a long moment, something working behind her eyes that I didn't have a name for yet. Then she held out her hand, palm up, and I understood it for the enormous thing it was, an omega who flinched from touch, offering it freely, on her own terms, for the first time since I'd found her in the snow. I took it. I didn't let go for the entire hour that followed. The alarm came 14 minutes before Martin's finished, 3 short bursts, the northern perimeter again, this time with movement that didn't retreat. Sarah's voice crackled through the comm low enough that I don't think Fara heard the words, just my jaw tightening, just my grip going a fraction firmer around her hand. Contact confirmed. 6 men. Not scouts this time. I didn't leave her. Whatever was happening at my border, my people were trained for it, and I had made a promise standing in a snowbank that I intended to keep even when keeping it cost me something. I stayed until Martins lifted the small transmitter free and dropped it into a lead-lined case with a sound like a verdict, until the wound was closed, until Fara's breathing evened out into something like relief. Only then did I go deal with the 6 men at my border. It didn't take long. They weren't prepared for Northern Territory defended by people who'd trained for exactly this. 3 retreated. 3 didn't get the chance to. By the time I made it back to the house, hands still not entirely steady, dawn was breaking gray and cold over the tree line, and I found Fara awake, sitting up against the pillows, watching me cross the room with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Not fear. Not calculation. Something quieter. "You're hurt," she said. "Not mine." I hadn't realized until she said it that there was blood on my shirt that wasn't hers or mine either. She held her hand out again, the same gesture as before the surgery, offered freely, and I crossed the room and took it, and something in the air between us shifted into a register I'd been careful not to name for 2 weeks. "They'll try again," she said. "He doesn't stop. That's not how he's built." "Neither am I." I sat on the edge of the bed, close enough now that I could feel the warmth coming off her skin, the fever long gone, replaced by something that made my pulse do something inconvenient. "The tracker's gone, Fara. Whatever comes next, he's not walking straight to your door anymore." "That should feel like enough," she said quiet. "It doesn't, yet. It will." She looked at me, really looked, the kind of look that strips away every careful distance I'd been keeping between us since the night I found her, and reached up, slow enough that I understood exactly what she was offering and exactly how much it cost her to offer it, and drew me down until there was no distance left at all. What happened after that I won't set down here in every detail. I'll say only this: I have known want before, plenty of it, uncomplicated and easily forgotten by morning. This was not that. This was careful and slow, and full of her hand finding mine again and again as if to confirm I was still choosing to stay gentle, still choosing her comfort over my own hunger, still choosing her every single time, right up until neither of us had breath left for choosing anything at all. I woke before dawn to find her already awake beside me, one hand resting over the twins, the other tangled loosely with mine, and for the first time since I'd carried her bleeding through the snow, I let myself believe we might actually keep her safe. That belief lasted exactly as long as it took Sarah to knock on the door, white-faced, a single sheet of paper in her hand. "You need to see this," she said. It came in overnight. Syndicate courier, dropped at the southern gate and gone before anyone could stop him. I unfolded it with Fara's hand still in mine. It wasn't a threat. It was worse than that, Phyllis. Names, dates, locations, written in Damon's own hand, every syndicate contact Fara had ever quietly recorded during 5 years of keeping his ledgers, laid out like a challenge. At the bottom, 4 words in handwriting Fara went rigid recognizing. "I know what you know."
Chapter 5. What Fara knows. Fara. I know what you know. 4 words, and every one of them landed like a hand around my throat. "He's not warning me," I said before Matteo could ask. "He's telling me he still thinks he owns it. Everything I ever wrote down, everything I ever heard through that house. He thinks it's still his to threaten me with." "Is it?" Sarah asked. Not unkind. Just direct, the way she'd been with me since the day I arrived. I sat with that question longer than I wanted to. 5 years of ledgers. 5 years of names crossing my desk disguised as invoices, alphas paying premiums to skip inspection, shipment routes that never once appeared on anything official. Damon had never once imagined I was reading for anything but arithmetic. "No," I said finally. "It's mine. He just doesn't know that yet." I laid it out for them at the long table in Matteo's war room. Every rotation schedule I could still recall, every client name attached to a face I'd seen behind that auction glass, every safe house Damon used as a decoy versus the 2 he actually trusted. I told them which of his contacts were compromised enough to flip if pressured correctly, which routes ran thin on security during shift changes, which piece of the whole rotten structure would bring the rest down fastest if struck first. By the time I finished, the room had gone very quiet, and Matteo was looking at me like he was seeing something for the first time that had been standing in front of him the whole while. "This isn't a leak," he said slowly. "This is a strike plan." "It's better than a leak," I said. "A leak gets buried in a week. This ends him." He nodded, already turning it over, already building the shape of it in his head the way I'd watched him build everything else since I arrived. Quick, decisive, already assigning names to tasks. And then just as fast he stopped. "You'll stay here," he said. "Somewhere secured, off the grid while we run it." "No." "Fara." I said no. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to. This plan works because I know which faces to point to in real time. I know which of his men will fold under pressure and which ones will lie straight through it. You don't have that. Nobody in this room has that but me. You're 8 months pregnant with twins and you've been tracked, shot at, and nearly bled out twice in 3 weeks, he said, and I heard something under the words now. Not just concern, something closer to fear he wasn't used to feeling and didn't like the shape of. "I am not sending you into the center of this. You're not sending me anywhere. I'm choosing to go. You are not." His voice dropped as he said it, dropped into something I felt in my chest before I understood what it was. Low, resonant, the air around us thickening in a way that made Sarah go rigid beside me, made Martins's eyes drop instantly to the table, made every person in that room go still and small and compliant all at once. Pure alpha command, deliberate or not, rolling off him like a wave meant to bend the room to his will. Everyone bent. Everyone except me. I felt it, felt the pull of it, that ancient thing in an Omega's blood that's built to fold under exactly this. And something in me, something forged in 5 years of folding under exactly this kind of pressure from Damon, simply refused to bend twice in one lifetime. I planted my feet. I held his eyes. I didn't raise my voice at all. "That's the same shape," I said quietly. Not the same man. Not the same reason. But the same shape, Matteo. And I have already survived one alpha who thought his voice was the last word on what I'm allowed to choose. The pheromones cut off so fast it was like watching a door slam. I watched horror move across his face. Not at me, at himself, at what he'd just done without fully deciding to do it. And the room exhaled all at once, Sarah's shoulders dropping, Martin's looking up again like he'd been released from something. Fara. His voice had gone rough, stripped of every ounce of command. I didn't. I know you didn't mean to. And I did know it. That was the terrifying part. I could see the difference clear as anything between a man testing the edges of his power over me and a man horrified to discover he had any at all. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. He didn't argue again. He didn't apologize with excuses either, which I noted and filed away as the thing that mattered most. He simply said, "You're right. I'm sorry," and let it sit there, ugly and unresolved, exactly as it should. "I'm going," I said again, gentler now. "Not because I don't understand the risk. Because I've spent 5 years being moved around like something too fragile and too valuable to have an opinion about my own life. I won't do that again. Not even for you." He was quiet a long moment. Then he nodded once and something between us settled into a new and steadier shape. Not less protective, but no longer certain protection meant control. "Then we plan it together," he said. "Every piece." We spent the next 2 days doing exactly that. Routes, timing, contingencies, my knowledge married to his people's skill until the whole operation had a shape sharp enough to move. On the morning we were meant to execute it, Sarah burst into the war room without knocking, breathless in a way I'd never seen from her. "Change of plans," she said. "One of the syndicate transports diverted overnight. Wrong manifest, wrong route. They're not carrying weapons or currency like we expected." "Then what are they carrying?" Matteo asked. Sarah's eyes found mine, and something in her face made my stomach drop before she even said it. "Children," she said. "A whole shipment of them. Fara. One of the names on the manifest matches a record from 5 years back. A birth record." I felt the room tilt. "Whose?" I made myself ask, though some part of me already knew. Some part of me had known since the day Damon told me my first child hadn't survived and I'd chosen, against every instinct, to believe him. "A girl," Sarah said quietly. "Registered as Ray."
Chapter 6. Matteo. I had never seen Fara move that fast. The moment Sarah said the name, she was already reaching for her coat, already reciting coordinates from the diverted manifest like she'd memorized the whole route in the seconds it took to hear it. I caught her wrist, gently, the way I'd learned to touch her, not to stop her, because I already knew better than to try that again, but to make her look at me first. "We do this together," I said. "Not you running ahead into a transport full of armed men." She didn't argue. That alone told me how deep the fear ran under the resolve. We hit the convoy at a checkpoint 11 miles east, my people moving fast and clean, the syndicate escort outnumbered and unprepared for Northern Territory tactics on what they'd assumed was safe passage. It was over in minutes. What came after took longer to recover from. There were 9 children in that transport. Fara went down the row of them like a woman counting her own heartbeat, checking faces, checking ages, until she stopped in front of a girl no older than 5, dark-eyed, thin, staring back at all of us like she'd already learned that adults were something to survive rather than trust. "Ray," Fara said, and her voice broke clean in half around the name. The girl didn't answer, didn't move toward her. I watched 5 years of a mother's grief crash directly into a child who had no memory of ever having one, and there was nothing I could do but stand close enough to catch Fara if her knees gave out, which they very nearly did. "She won't remember me," Fara whispered. "She won't know me at all." "She's alive," I told her low, just for her. "That's the part you build from." We got the children clear, got them into transport back toward the house. Ray silent the entire ride with Fara sitting close but not touching, giving the girl exactly the distance she needed the way I'd once given Fara hers. I watched her do it and felt something in my chest ache in a way I didn't have a clean name for. We were 3 miles from the house when my perimeter alarm went off differently than I'd ever heard it, Not the short bursts for scouts, but a long, continuous tone. Someone had crossed onto my land uninvited and hadn't been stopped doing it. I found him standing in the clearing outside the house like he had every right to be there. Damon. I knew him the second I saw him, knew him from the fury barely leashed behind his eyes, from the way he stood like a man used to rooms rearranging themselves around his presence. He was alone. That detail mattered more than anything else in the clearing. A man like Damon doesn't come alone unless he's either a fool or he's testing something. He wasn't a fool. You have something of mine, he said, eyes moving past me to the transport where Fara sat frozen, one hand instinctively covering her stomach, the other reaching for Ray without quite touching her. You're mistaken, I said. Nothing on this land belongs to you. His jaw tightened. I watched him take my measure the way men like him always do eventually, the size of me, the men positioned at my back who hadn't needed to be called, the simple fact that I was standing on ground I controlled completely and he was standing on ground he didn't. I watched him do the arithmetic in real time. 6 men lost at my border already. No backup within reach. An alpha in front of him who outweighed him, outnumbered him, and had every reason in the world to end this permanently. Something in his face shifted. Not surrender. I'd learn later that Damon didn't have surrender in him at all, only recalculation. This isn't finished, he said. It's finished for today. I kept my voice level, kept every muscle in my body coiled and ready and utterly still, because I understood, the way you understand these things in the exact moment they matter, that the worst thing I could do was give him a reason to think I wanted this to become a fight he might survive telling stories about later. Walk back to whatever hole you came from. Bring more men next time if you want a different outcome. You won't get one. His eyes cut past me one more time, found Fara's, and something passed between them that made her flinch even from that distance. Some private cruelty I didn't have the history to fully read, but understood the shape of well enough to hate. Tell her, he said, still looking past me, that I don't lose things. I misplace them. Temporarily. Then he turned and walked back into the tree line, unhurried, like a man simply choosing to leave rather than a man who'd just been outmatched, and that, more than anything, told me exactly how dangerous he still was. A cornered man panics. A patient one regroups. I found Fara shaking in the back of the transport, Ray curled small and silent against her side, and I climbed in beside them without asking, close enough to be useful, far enough to leave the choice hers. He'll come back, she said, voice barely above a whisper. That wasn't him giving up. That was him deciding it wasn't worth it today. I know. He'll wait until it costs you something to fight him. He'll wait until your men are stretched thin, until you're distracted, until... She stopped herself, one hand tightening over her stomach, and I watched a different kind of fear move across her face, one that had nothing to do with Damon at all. Fara. Something's wrong, she said, and her breath caught hard enough that Ray's small hand found hers without being asked. Matteo, I think it's starting.
Chapter 7. The Standoff. Fara. Pain arrived like a wave I'd known was coming and still wasn't ready for. It came in low first, a tightening band across my stomach that I told myself was only stress, only fear finally catching up with my body after the clearing, after Damon's eyes on me, after 5 years of bracing for exactly this kind of collision between what I feared and what actually happened. Then it came again, sharper, and Martins's face when he examined me told me everything before he said a word. She's in labor, he said to Matteo. Early. Not dangerously early, but early enough that this isn't going to be gentle. How long do we have? Hours, not days. I watched something pass across Matteo's face. Calculation layered over fear, layered over a resolve I'd come to recognize as entirely his own. His men were still recovering from the transport strike. Half his perimeter security was escorting the rescued children to a secondary safe house. We were, in every practical sense, exactly as stretched thin as I'd warned him Damon would wait for. He'll know, I said between breaths. He'll have eyes on this place. He'll know exactly what's happening and exactly how few men you have left to stop him. Then we don't wait for him to use that, Matteo said, and I watched him become someone else in that moment. Not the man who'd sat gently at my bedside, but the alpha who ruled this territory and intended to keep ruling it. He called Sarah, gave orders fast and clean, pulled every remaining body toward the house. It wasn't enough time. I was 2 hours into labor, gripping Martins's hand hard enough to bruise, when the alarm went off one final time. Not short bursts, not a long continuous tone, but silence where the perimeter signal should have been at all, which Sarah told me later was somehow worse, because it meant someone had gotten close enough to disable it before it could sound. Damon walked through the front doors of Matteo's house like he'd been invited. He wasn't alone this time. 6 men at his back, armed, spread wide enough to cover every exit, and I understood in one cold, clarifying instant exactly what he'd been waiting for. Not weakness in Matteo's men. Weakness in the one moment I couldn't run, couldn't fight, couldn't do anything but lie there and be exactly as vulnerable as he needed me to be. Fara. His voice carried down the hallway, almost gentle, which was somehow the most frightening register he owned. I told you. I don't lose things. Matteo was already between us before Damon finished the sentence, and something in the air shifted violently. Not pheromones this time, nothing so subtle. Pure open challenge, alpha to alpha, the kind that doesn't end in words. You crossed onto my land, Matteo said, carrying weapons while a woman under my protection is in labor. There is no version of tonight where you walk back out of here holding anything you came for. She's my wife. Damon's jaw tightened. Those are my children. Nothing you've done changes that on paper. She's not your anything. My voice, when it came, was ragged with pain, but it carried anyway, and both of them turned toward the sound of it. I forced myself upright against the pillows, Martins's hands steadying my back. You sold me, Damon. You handed me to men who'd have bred me like livestock and called it business. Whatever claim you think you still have, you burned it the day you decided I was worth more sold than kept. Something dark moved across his face. You always did think you were smarter than your place. I was smarter than you ever gave me credit for, I said, and the pain crested again, forcing a groan through my teeth, and through it I kept my eyes locked on his. I've spent 2 weeks handing your entire syndicate to a man who actually knows how to use it. Every route. Every contact. Every safe house you thought was secret. It's already burning, Damon. You just haven't gotten the message yet because you were too busy driving out here to reclaim something you never actually owned. I watched that land, watched the exact moment understanding cracked through his fury, watched him do frantic mental arithmetic on how much of his empire might already be compromised. He didn't get the chance to answer. Matteo moved first, not reckless, not desperate, but with the terrible precision of a man who has been waiting for permission to act and has just received it. The room dissolved into violence fast enough that I only caught pieces. Sarah's people arriving through the side entrance Damon's men hadn't secured, gunfire that Martins threw his body between me and instinctively, the crash of furniture, Damon's voice shouting orders that his men were too busy dying or fleeing to follow. Another contraction hit, worse than the last, and the world narrowed down to pain and Martins's voice telling me to breathe, to push through it, that the twins were coming whether the house was burning down around us or not. I heard Matteo and Damon collide somewhere close, the specific brutal sound of 2 large men who both intend to end this permanently, and I could not see it, could not do anything but scream through a contraction while men fought over whether I would live free or be dragged back into a life I'd rather have died in that snowbank than return to. Fara. Martins's voice, urgent, close. I need you to push. Now. I pushed. Somewhere beyond the door I heard Damon's voice crack. Not command anymore, something closer to panic, and Matteo's voice, low and final, saying something I couldn't make out over my own ragged breathing and the roar of my own heartbeat. The first cry came into the world exactly as I heard glass shatter somewhere down the hall. One of Damon's men or Damon himself, I wouldn't know until later, going through a window rather than face what was coming for him. A boy, Martins said, voice thick with relief, laying a small, furious, red-faced weight against my chest for one bare second before the next contraction seized me and he had to take him again to make room for what came after. The second cry came almost on top of the first, thinner and then stronger, and I heard Martins say, "A girl," through what sounded suspiciously like his own voice breaking, and somewhere in the wreckage of the hallway I heard Matteo's voice roar something that wasn't words at all. Pure, furious relief, pure devastating fury both at once. Then silence. The kind of silence that comes after violence finally spends itself out. Matteo appeared in the doorway a moment later, blood on his knuckles that wasn't his, a cut along his jaw already clotting, breathing hard. And behind him Sarah's voice carried down the hall reporting that Damon had gone through the study window and into the tree line, 3 of his men down, the rest scattered, no one willing to die for a cause that was already burning to the ground somewhere out of sight. "He's gone," Matteo said. "Wounded. Running. Sarah's people are tracking the blood trail, but he won't be caught tonight," I finished, and something in me settled around that truth rather than fighting it, because I understood already that Damon escaping wounded and humiliated was its own kind of ending, even if it wasn't the final one. Matteo crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped at the edge of the bed, staring down at the 2 small, furious, impossibly alive faces against my chest like he'd never seen anything like them, which, I realized watching him, he probably hadn't. "River," I said, testing the name against the small weight in my left arm, "and Sky." My eyes lifted to his, exhausted and raw and for the first time in longer than I could remember, entirely unafraid. "Say hello to your children." Our children, I would come to call them later, though neither of us said it out loud that night. He didn't need to. I watched it settle into his face anyway. Some fierce, wordless claim that had nothing to do with pheromones or dominance and everything to do with a man who had bled defending a family he'd chosen freely, and would go on choosing every day after this one. Ray appeared in the doorway sometime near dawn, small and hesitant, drawn by the sound of new voices in the house. She didn't come close. Not yet. But she stood there a long moment watching, and something in her face, some careful, guarded curiosity, told me that distance too was a thing we could close in time, the same way Matteo had once closed the distance with me. Patiently and only ever with permission. Somewhere beyond these walls I knew the syndicate's empire was already coming apart at the seams. I'd shown Matteo how to cut. Clients exposed, routes seized, safe houses raided one by one under the weight of everything I'd carried out of that house in my own memory rather than any stolen file. It would take weeks yet to finish collapsing entirely. Damon was still out there, wounded and furious and far from finished, exactly the kind of man who regroups rather than surrenders. But for tonight, in a house full of people who had bled to keep me and my children safe, I let myself simply rest. River and Sky against my chest, Ray watching cautiously from the doorway, Matteo's hand finding mine the way it always did now, freely offered, freely taken. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time since Damon's hand had closed around my arm and hauled me toward that auction floor, I was no longer facing it alone.